The canvas tent sagged under the weight of morning dew. It seemed darkening where the Rio Grande's moisture crept through thread and fiber. And inside that makeshift shelter lived Brennan, a woman of 24 years who had buried her husband 6 months prior beneath the unforgiving New Mexico soil. She woke that September morning in 1877 to the sound of rushing water and the lonely cry of a hawk circling overhead. Her fingers traced the worn cotton of her blanket, feeling every patch and repair she had made since settling here on the riverbank outside Santa Rosa. The tent was all she had left after the fever took James, after the bank took their small ranch, after the world seemed determined to strip away everything she had built in this harsh territory. Catherine pushed herself upright, her dark hair falling in tangled waves past her shoulders. She had been beautiful once, or so James used to tell her. Now she felt weathered and worn, aged beyond her years by grief and hardship. Her hands were calloused from washing clothes in the river for the townspeople, her only source of income since becoming a widow. The work barely kept her fed, but it kept her alive, and some days that felt like enough. She stepped outside into the golden morning light, squinting against the sun's glare off the water. The river ran swift and clear this time of year, fed by distant mountain snows. She had learned its moods over these past months, learned when to stay away from its banks and when it was safe to work. Today, it seemed peaceful, almost gentle. Catherine gathered her washing supplies and the bundle of clothes she had collected from town the day before. Mrs. Henderson's sheets, Mr. Garcia's work shirts, the schoolteacher's dresses. Each piece represented a few pennies, a small step toward survival. She knelt by the water's edge, her skirt tucked beneath her knees, and began the rhythmic work of scrubbing fabric against the washboard. The sun climbed higher as she worked, warming her back through the thin fabric of her dress. She hummed an old song her mother had taught her, trying to fill the silence with something besides the endless rush of water and her own thoughts. The loneliness was the hardest part. Not the poverty, not the uncertainty, but the vast emptiness of days without conversation, without touch, without someone to share the weight of existence. She was wringing out a shirt when she heard the horse approaching. Catherine looked up, one hand shielding her eyes, and saw a rider making his way along the riverbank. He sat tall in the saddle, his hat pulled low against the sun, leading a pack horse laden with supplies. As he drew closer, she could make out more details. He was young, perhaps her age or a few years older, with broad shoulders and the easy posture of someone who spent his life on horseback. The cowboy slowed as he noticed her tent, then stopped altogether. He sat there for a moment, taking in the scene, the sagging canvas shelter, the woman kneeling in the mud, the washing spread across the bushes to dry. Catherine felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment and defiance in equal measure. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze across the distance. He dismounted with fluid grace, leaving his horses ground-tied, and walked toward her slowly, his hands visible and empty. As he came closer, Catherine could see his face properly. He had kind eyes, she noticed, a warm brown that reminded her of the earth after rain. His jaw was strong beneath several days' growth of beard, and his clothes, while dusty from travel, were well made and cared for. "Morning, madam," he said, removing his hat. His voice was deep and gentle. "Name is Quinton Quinn. I did not mean to startle you." "You did not startle me," Catherine replied, though her racing heart suggested otherwise. "I am Brennan. Can I help you with something?" Quinton looked back at her tent, then at the washing spread around her. His expression was thoughtful, concerned even, but not pitying. She was grateful for that. She could not bear pity. "I was just passing through, heading toward Santa Rosa to see about work on one of the ranches," he said. I have been riding since dawn and my canteen is near empty. Would you mind if I refilled it from the river?" Catherine gestured toward the water. "Help yourself. It runs clean here." He walked past her to the river's edge, kneeling to fill his canteen. As he did, Catherine noticed the way his shirt pulled across his back, the strength evident in his movements. She forced herself to look away, focusing on the washing in her hands. It had been so long since she had been close to a man since James died. The awareness unsettled her. Quinton stood, capping his canteen, but he did not immediately return to his horses. Instead, he lingered, his eyes on the tent again. "Have you been living here long?" he asked. Catherine felt her defenses rise. "Long enough. Is that any concern of yours?" "No, madam, I suppose it is not," Quinton said carefully. "But winter will be coming soon. This tent will not protect you from the cold." "I am aware of that," Catherine said, her voice sharper than she intended. "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Quinn. I hope you find the work you are looking for." It was a clear dismissal, but Quinton did not move. He stood there, turning his hat in his hands, his brow furrowed. Catherine waited, her hands still in the river water, soap suds floating around her wrists. "How did you end up here?" Quinton asked finally. "If you do not mind my asking." Catherine did mind, but something in his expression made her answer anyway. Maybe it was the loneliness talking, or maybe it was simply the need to speak to another human being about something real. "My husband died 6 months ago," she said quietly. "Fever took him in 3 days. We had a small ranch, but there was debt. The bank took it all. I had nowhere else to go, so I came here. I wash clothes for people in town. It keeps me fed." Quinton absorbed this information silently. His jaw tightened, and she saw something flash in his eyes. Anger, perhaps, at the injustice of it, or maybe just sadness. "That is a hard way to live," he said. "It is the way I have," Catherine replied. She stood, wiping her wet hands on her apron. "Now, if you will excuse me, I have work to finish." Quinton nodded slowly. He settled his hat back on his head and walked toward his horses. Catherine watched him go, feeling an odd pang of disappointment, which was foolish. What did she expect? He was a passing stranger, nothing more, but then Quinton stopped. He stood by his horses for a long moment, his hand on his saddle, his head bowed as if in thought. Then he turned back to her. "Mrs. Brennan," he called, "what if I built you a proper house, something that would last through the winter?" Catherine stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What?" "A house," Quinton repeated, walking back toward her. "Nothing fancy but solid. 4 walls, a good roof, a door that closes. I am handy with carpentry. My father was a builder back in Texas before he died. I learned from him." "Why would you do that?" Catherine asked, bewildered. "You do not even know me." Quinton shrugged, but his eyes were serious. "Because you need help and I can give it. Because no woman should have to live in a tent by the river like this. Because it is the right thing to do." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes, and she blinked them back fiercely. She would not cry in front of this stranger, no matter how kind his offer. "I cannot pay you," she said. "I did not ask you to," Quinton replied. "I do not accept charity." "It is not charity, it is just one human being helping another." He paused, then added, "Though I would not refuse a few home-cooked meals while I work if you are willing. I have been eating my own cooking for too long, and it shows." Despite herself, Catherine felt the corner of her mouth twitch. "I do not have much to cook with." "I have supplies," Quinton said, gesturing to his pack horse. "More than enough to share." Catherine looked at him, really looked at him, trying to understand what kind of man would make such an offer. His face was open, honest. She saw no deception there, no hidden motive. Just genuine concern and a desire to help. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked quietly. Quinton was silent for a moment, his gaze drifting to the river. "My mother died when I was 15, he said finally. My father tried to keep going, but grief took the heart out of him. He died 2 years later. Before he passed, he told me that the measure of a man is not what he achieves for himself, but what he does for others when there is nothing in it for him. I have tried to live by that. Catherine felt something shift in her chest, a softening she had not allowed herself in months. I do not know what to say. Say yes, Quinton said simply. Let me build you a house, Mrs. Brennan. Let me do this one good thing. She should say no. She should protect herself, maintain her distance, refuse to become indebted to this stranger. But the thought of winter in the tent, of the cold seeping through canvas, of the very real possibility that she might not survive another harsh New Mexico season, made her hesitate. Yes, she heard herself say. Yes, all right, thank you. Quinton's face broke into a smile and Catherine felt her breath catch. He was handsome when he smiled, truly handsome. The realization unsettled her. Where should I build it? Quinton asked, all business now. Catherine looked around, considering. There, she said, pointing to a flat piece of ground about 30 yards from the river, sheltered by a few cottonwood trees. High enough that the spring floods would not reach it, but close enough to the water. Good choice, Quinton said. He walked to the spot, studying the ground, pacing out dimensions. Catherine watched him, still hardly believing this was happening. Quinton turned back to her. I will need to go into Santa Rosa to buy lumber and supplies. That work I mentioned can wait a few weeks. This is more important. But your money, Catherine protested. I have enough, Quinton said firmly. Do not worry about that. He mounted his horse and tipped his hat to her. I will be back before sunset. Will you be all right here alone? Catherine almost laughed. She had been alone for 6 months. One more day would not break her. I will be fine. She watched him ride away, his figure growing smaller against the vast New Mexico landscape. When he was out of sight, she sank down onto a rock, her legs suddenly weak. What had just happened? A stranger had appeared out of nowhere and offered to build her a house. It felt like something from a dream, or perhaps a story her mother used to tell. She touched her chest, feeling her heart beating fast beneath her palm. For the first time in months, she felt something other than despair. Hope, maybe, or just the simple anticipation of change. Catherine returned to her washing, but her mind was elsewhere. She found herself wondering about Quinton Quinn, about where he came from and where he was going, about why he really stopped, why he really offered to help. Men did not just do things like this, not in her experience. Everyone wanted something. But when Quinton returned that evening, his pack horse now laden with lumber and supplies, he asked for nothing except permission to sleep near her tent and a cup of coffee if she could spare it. Catherine gave him both, and they sat by her small fire as the sun set over the river, not talking much, just existing in the same space. She noticed how he kept a respectful distance, how he never let his eyes linger inappropriately, how he treated her with a courtesy that felt genuine rather than calculated. By the time she retired to her tent that night, listening to the sound of him settling into his bedroll under the stars, she felt something she had not felt in a long time, safe. The next morning, Quinton began building. Catherine went about her work, washing clothes and hanging them to dry, but she found her attention constantly drawn to him. He worked with steady efficiency, measuring and sawing, hammering and fitting. His movements were practiced, confident. He clearly knew what he was doing. By midday, he had the basic frame started. 4 corner posts sunk deep into the ground, braced and level. Cross beams connecting them, forming the skeleton of walls. Catherine brought him water and watched as he wiped sweat from his brow, his shirt clinging to his back. You are making good progress, she said. It is coming together, Quinton agreed. He took a long drink of water, then smiled at her. By the end of the week, you should have walls and a roof. The door and window will take a bit longer." "A window," Catherine repeated, almost wonderingly. She had not expected a window. "Every home needs a window," Quinton said. "Let the light in, keep the darkness out." She thought about that later as she prepared their supper. Let the light in, keep the darkness out. It felt like more than just a statement about windows. It felt like a philosophy, a way of living that she had forgotten in her grief. They ate together that evening, a simple meal of beans and cornbread. But Catherine found herself enjoying it more than she had enjoyed food in months. Quinton told her about his travels, about the places he had seen since leaving Texas 3 years ago. Colorado and its high mountains, Kansas and its endless plains, now New Mexico with its desert beauty. "You ever think about settling down?" Catherine asked, then immediately regretted the forwardness of the question, but Quinton did not seem bothered. He considered it seriously, staring into the fire. "I think about it sometimes," he said, "but I have not found the right place yet, or maybe I have not found the right reason." Their eyes met across the fire, and Catherine felt a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. She looked away quickly, confused by her own reaction. It was too soon, too fast. James had only been gone 6 months, but her heart did not seem to care about timelines or propriety. It beat faster whenever Quinton was near, and at night she found herself lying awake in her tent, listening to him breathing in his bedroll just yards away, wondering what it would be like to not be alone anymore. The days fell into a rhythm. Catherine washed clothes in the morning and Quinton built the house. In the afternoons, they would take breaks together, sitting in the shade of the cottonwoods, talking about everything and nothing. She learned that he was 27, that he loved horses more than most people, that he could not sing worth a damn, but he tried anyway. He learned that she had grown up in St. Louis, that she had come west with James 5 years ago seeking adventure, that she missed her sister terribly but had lost touch when the ranch failed. "Why did you not go back to St. Louis?" Quinton asked one afternoon. "Surely your family would have taken you in." Catherine shook her head. "My father disowned me when I married James. He did not approve, said James was beneath me, that I was throwing my life away. I have not spoken to him since. My mother writes sometimes in secret, but she cannot go against my father's wishes." "That is hard," Quinton said quietly. "It is what it is," Catherine replied, though her voice caught. "I made my choice. I do not regret loving James." "No," Quinton agreed. "Love is never something to regret." The house took shape day by day. Walls rose solid and strong. A roof went on, shingles overlapping perfectly to keep out rain and snow. A door was hung with a latch that actually worked. And true to his word, Quinton installed a window, a real glass window that he must have spent a fortune on, though he refused to tell her the cost. Catherine stood inside her new house 2 weeks after Quinton had arrived, running her hands over the smooth wood walls, hardly able to believe it was real. It was small, just 1 room, but it felt like a palace after the tent. There was a fireplace that Quinton had built from river stones, shelves for her few possessions, and hooks on the wall for hanging clothes. He had even built her a bed frame, raised off the ground to keep her warm in winter. "I do not know how to thank you," Catherine said, her voice thick with emotion. Quinton stood in the doorway, his hat in his hands, looking pleased but also somehow sad. "No thanks needed," he said. "I am just glad I could help. When will you leave?" Catherine asked, and she hated how small her voice sounded. "Tomorrow morning," Quinton said. "I should get to that ranch job before they hire someone else. Tomorrow." The word fell between them like a stone. Catherine felt panic rise in her chest. She was not ready for him to leave. These past 2 weeks had been the happiest she had been since James died. maybe even happier than some times with James, though she felt guilty admitting it even to herself. "Stay for supper at least," she said. "One last meal together." Quinton nodded. "I would like that." She cooked the best meal she could manage with her limited supplies, and they ate slowly, drawing out the time. The conversation was stilted, full of long pauses and unfinished thoughts. There was so much Catherine wanted to say, but she did not know how. How did you tell a man you barely knew that he had become important to you? That the thought of him leaving felt like losing something precious. After they ate, they sat by the fire as usual. The September night had turned cool, and Catherine wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Quinton fed another piece of wood to the flames, sending sparks spiraling up into the darkness. "Catherine," he said finally, and it was the first time he had used her given name. "I need to tell you something." She looked at him, her heart in her throat. "What is it?" He turned to face her, his expression earnest in the firelight. "These past 2 weeks have meant more to me than I can properly say. I came here planning to do a good deed and move on, but somewhere along the way that changed. You changed it." Catherine's breath caught. "Quinton." "Let me finish," he said gently. "I know it has only been 2 weeks. I know your husband has not been gone long. I know I have no right to feel what I feel. But I have to tell you before I leave, because if I do not, I will regret it for the rest of my life." "Tell me what?" Catherine whispered, though she thought she knew. "That I am falling in love with you," Quinton said simply. "Maybe I have been since that first morning when I saw you by the river, so fierce and proud despite everything. Maybe it happened slower, over all our conversations, all the meals we shared. But it happened, and I needed you to know." Catherine felt tears spill down her cheeks. "I do not know what to say." "You do not have to say anything," Quinton said. "I do not expect anything from you. Your grief is your own, and you need to heal in your own time. I just wanted you to know that you are not alone, that someone sees you and cares about you. If you ever need anything, anything at all, you can reach me through the telegraph office in Santa Rosa. I will come, no matter where I am." She reached across the space between them and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. "You are a good man, Quinton Quinn." "I try to be," he said softly. They sat there holding hands until the fire burned low, neither wanting to break the connection, neither ready to say goodbye. When Catherine finally retreated to her new house that night, she lay in her new bed and let herself cry. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming complexity of emotions swirling inside her. She had loved James, truly loved him. But James was gone, and she was still here, still alive, still capable of feeling things. And what she felt for Quinton was real and powerful and terrifying. Was it wrong to care for someone else so soon? Was she betraying James's memory? But she thought James would understand. He had always wanted her to be happy. Before he died, delirious with fever, he had gripped her hand and made her promise not to give up on life. To keep going, to find joy again. At the time, she had thought it was impossible, but maybe, just maybe, it was not. Catherine woke before dawn and went outside to find Quinton already up, packing his things by the light of the dying fire. She watched him for a moment, memorizing the way he moved, the set of his shoulders, the profile of his face. "Quinton," she said. He turned, and in the pre-dawn darkness she could not quite read his expression. "You are up early." "I could not sleep," Catherine admitted. She walked toward him, her bare feet cold in the dew-wet grass. "I have been thinking about what you said last night." "Catherine, you do not have to let me finish," she said, echoing his words from the night before. "You are right that it has only been 2 weeks. You are right that James has not been gone long, but you are wrong about one thing." "What is that?" "You are wrong that you have no right to feel what you feel," Catherine said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Because I feel it too. I have been trying not to, telling myself it is too soon, that I am just lonely and confused. But it is not confusion. It is real. Quinton stood very still. What are you saying? I am saying that I am falling in love with you too, Catherine said. And I do not want you to leave, not yet, maybe not ever. The words hung in the air between them. Then Quinton closed the distance and his hands came up to cup her face, gentle and reverent. Are you sure? He asked. Are you absolutely sure? I am terrified, Catherine admitted. But yes, I am sure. He kissed her then, soft and careful, as if she were something precious that might break. Catherine's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and the kiss deepened. It was nothing like kissing James had been. This was different, new, its own thing entirely, and that was all right. She was allowed to have this. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Quinton rested his forehead against hers. I will stay, he said, for as long as you will have me. What about the ranch job? There will be other jobs, Quinton said, but there is only one you. They spent that day together, not doing much of anything, just being together. Quinton unpacked his things again, and they rearranged the house to accommodate both their belongings. It was domestic and sweet, and felt so natural that Catherine wondered how she had ever thought she could let him go. That evening, as they prepared supper together in the small space, working around each other with the ease of people who had been doing this for years rather than weeks, Catherine felt something settle in her chest. Peace, maybe, or just the rightness of it all. We should go into Santa Rosa tomorrow, Quinton said as they ate. Let people know we are together. I do not want there to be any questions about propriety. Catherine appreciated that. A woman living alone with a man out by the river would cause talk, and while she did not much care what people thought, she did not want to lose her washing customers either. They needed the income. We should get married, she said, surprising herself with the boldness of the suggestion. Quinton looked at her, his fork halfway to his mouth. Married? Unless you do not want to, Catherine said quickly, feeling her cheeks heat. I just thought since we are planning to be together anyway, we might as well do it properly. A slow smile spread across Quinton's face. Catherine Brennan, are you proposing to me? I suppose I am, Catherine said, feeling giddy and nervous all at once. Then yes, Quinton said, setting down his fork and reaching for her hand. Yes, I will marry you. Nothing would make me happier. They went into Santa Rosa the next morning, riding together on Quinton's horse while the pack horse followed behind. Catherine had not been into town since before Quinton arrived, and she felt self-conscious riding in with him, knowing how it must look. But Quinton sat tall and proud, his arm secure around her waist, and she drew strength from his presence. They went first to the general store, where Quinton bought supplies they would need, including fabric for a wedding dress. Catherine protested the expense, but he insisted. You are only going to get married once more in your life, he said. You deserve a proper dress. Mrs. Henderson, who ran the boarding house and was one of Catherine's washing customers, was in the store. She looked at Catherine and Quinton with undisguised curiosity. Mrs. Brennan, she said. I did not expect to see you today. I was going to bring my washing out to you tomorrow. I will still take it, Catherine said, but I wanted to let you know that there have been some changes. This is Quinton Quinn. We are going to be married. Mrs. Henderson's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. Married? My goodness, that is quick. When you know, Quinton said easily, and Catherine could have kissed him for the casual confidence in his voice. Word spread quickly in a small town like Santa Rosa. By the time they reached the church to speak with the pastor, half the town seemed to know that the widow by the river was marrying the stranger who had built her a house. The reactions were mixed. Some people were genuinely happy for her. Others were clearly scandalized by the speed of it all. Pastor Williams, a kind man in his 50s who had presided over James's funeral, looked at Catherine with concern. "Are you certain about this, Mrs. Brennan? It has not been very long since your husband passed." "I am certain," Catherine said firmly. "I loved my husband and I will always honor his memory, but he is gone and I am still here. Quinton is a good man and I care for him. We want to build a life together." The pastor studied her face, then nodded slowly. "Very well. If you are sure, I will perform the ceremony." "When were you thinking?" "As soon as possible," Quinton said. "This week, if that can be arranged." They settled on 3 days hence, a Saturday afternoon. It would give Catherine time to alter the dress fabric into something wearable and give the town time to adjust to the idea. Catherine had no illusions that everyone would approve, but she found she did not care as much as she thought she would. She was tired of living for other people's expectations. As they rowed back to the river that afternoon, laden with supplies and fabric and the promise of a future, Catherine felt lighter than she had in months, maybe even years. With James, there had always been a sense of struggle, of fighting against the world to carve out their place. With Quinton, things felt easier. Not easy, life was never easy, but easier. Like they were moving with the current instead of against it. Over the next 3 days, Catherine worked on her dress while Quinton continued improving the house. He built a proper table and chairs, installed more shelves, and even dug the beginnings of a root cellar to store food for the winter. Watching him work, seeing him build a life for them with his own hands, made Catherine fall more deeply in love with him every day. On their wedding day, Catherine woke with butterflies in her stomach. The dress was ready, a simple but elegant design in pale blue cotton. She had no flowers for her hair, but Quinton surprised her by presenting a crown of wildflowers he had gathered at dawn. "You look beautiful," he said as he placed them carefully in her dark hair. "You clean up pretty well yourself," Catherine replied, taking in his freshly shaved face and clean shirt. They rode into town together, and Catherine was surprised to see a small crowd gathered at the church. Mrs. Henderson was there, along with several other women Catherine washed for. Mr. Garcia, the blacksmith, the school teacher, Miss Potter. Even some people Catherine did not know well had come. Pastor Williams smiled at them as they entered the church. "Ready." Catherine looked at Quinton, at his warm brown eyes and gentle smile, and felt certainty fill her. "Ready." The ceremony was simple and short, but Catherine felt every word of the vows sink into her heart. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health. She had said these words before with James, and she had meant them then. She meant them now too, but differently. This was a new chapter, a new love, a new life. When Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, Quinton kissed her with such tenderness that Catherine felt tears slide down her cheeks. The small congregation applauded, and Mrs. Henderson dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. There was no formal reception, but several people gave them small gifts. Mrs. Henderson gave them a quilt she had made. Mr. Garcia gave them a set of horseshoes for luck. Miss Potter gave them a Bible with their names inscribed inside. Each gift touched Catherine deeply, a sign that despite the initial scandal, the community was willing to accept their union. As they rowed back to the river that evening, man and wife now, Catherine leaned back against Quinton's chest and watched the sky turn gold and pink with sunset. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For stopping that day," Catherine said. "For seeing me when I felt invisible, for building me a home, for giving me a reason to hope again." Quinton pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "You gave me those things too. I did not realize how lonely I was until I met you, how empty my life felt, always moving, never settling. You gave me a place to belong." That night, In their small house by the river, they became husband and wife in every sense. Catherine had been nervous, wondering if it would feel like a betrayal of James, but as Quinton held her with such love and reverence, she felt only rightness. This was her life now, her present and her future. The past would always be part of her, but it did not have to define her. Afterward, lying in Quinton's arms, listening to the river rush by outside, Catherine felt complete in a way she had not felt in a very long time, maybe ever. With James, love had been a wild adventure, exciting and unpredictable but also exhausting. With Quinton, love felt like coming home. The days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Quinton found work on the ranch he had originally been heading toward, and proved himself such a capable hand that they offered him a permanent position. The pay was decent, and combined with Catherine's washing income, they were able to live comfortably. Not wealthy, but comfortable, which was more than Catherine had dared hope for during those dark months in the tent. As winter approached, Catherine was grateful for the solid house Quinton had built. When the first snow fell in December, coating the world in white, she stood at her window and watched the flakes drift down, marveling at the warmth inside. The fireplace Quinton had built kept them cozy, and the roof held firm against wind and weather. They fell into a comfortable rhythm of married life. Quinton would leave before dawn to work on the ranch, and Catherine would spend her days washing clothes, cooking, and tending to their small home. In the evenings, they would eat together and talk about their days, and afterward they would sit by the fire, Catherine mending clothes while Quinton carved small figures from wood, a hobby he had picked up from his father. But as January arrived, Catherine began to notice changes in herself. A persistent queasiness in the mornings, a tenderness in her breasts, a fatigue that seemed to seep into her bones. At first, she attributed it to the winter cold, to working too hard. But when her monthly courses failed to arrive for the second month in a row, she knew she was pregnant. Catherine sat on the edge of their bed, one hand pressed to her still flat stomach, trying to sort through the tangle of emotions. Joy, certainly. Fear, absolutely. And underneath it all, a complicated grief. She had wanted children with James, but it had never happened. And now here she was, carrying Quinton's child after only a few months of marriage. She told him that evening, watching his face carefully for his reaction. Quinton had been stirring the fire, but he froze at her words, poker in hand. "Pregnant?" he repeated. "Yes," Catherine said. "I am fairly certain, maybe 3 months along." Quinton set down the poker very carefully, then crossed to her in 2 long strides. He dropped to his knees in front of her, his hands coming up to cradle her face. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Are you happy? Are you scared?" "All of it," Catherine admitted. "All the feelings at once." "We are going to have a baby," Quinton said wonderingly. His hand slid down to her stomach, resting there with such gentleness that Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. "A child, our child." "You are happy then?" Catherine asked. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Quinton said. His eyes were bright with emotion. "You have given me so much already. A home, a purpose, a reason to wake up every morning with joy in my heart. And now this. A family. Catherine, I never dared to dream this big." She pulled him up to sit beside her on the bed, and they held each other as the fire crackled in the hearth. "I am scared," Catherine confessed. "Childbirth is dangerous, and what if something goes wrong? What if I cannot be a good mother?" "You are going to be an amazing mother," Quinton said firmly. "And I will be with you every step of the way. We will figure this out together." The pregnancy progressed through the winter and into spring. Catherine's body changed, her belly swelling with the growing life inside. She had to give up the washing work by March, finding it too physically demanding. Quinton took on extra hours at the ranch to make up for the lost income, but he never complained, never made her feel guilty for it. As her due date approached in late May, Catherine found herself thinking often about James. She wondered what he would think about all this, about her new life, her new love, the baby she was about to bring into the world. She liked to think he would be happy for her. He had been a good man, and good men wanted happiness for the people they loved, even if that happiness came after they were gone. Mrs. Henderson, who had warmed to Catherine considerably over the months, offered to serve as midwife when the time came. She had delivered dozens of babies in her years, and Catherine trusted her. As the days of waiting stretched on, Catherine felt increasingly anxious. Her back ached constantly, her feet were swollen, and she felt huge and ungainly. But Quinton never made her feel anything but beautiful. He would rub her aching back in the evenings, help her into bed when climbing the frame became difficult, and talk to her belly about all the things they would do together when the baby arrived. His excitement and love helped ease Catherine's fears. The labor began on a hot afternoon in late May. Catherine was hanging laundry, something she had insisted on doing despite Quinton's protests, when she felt the first contraction grip her belly. She gasped, one hand going to her stomach, and the wet sheet she had been holding fell back into the basket. Quinton was at the ranch, and for a moment Catherine panicked. But then she remembered what Mrs. Henderson had told her. Early labor could last hours, sometimes days. There was time. She made her way slowly back to the house and tried to time the contractions. They were irregular, sometimes 20 minutes apart, sometimes 30. Nothing to worry about yet. But as the afternoon wore on, they grew closer together and more intense. By the time Quinton arrived home at dusk, Catherine was pacing the house, breathing through contractions that came every 10 minutes. His face went white when he saw her. "The baby. It is time," Catherine said, trying to smile through another contraction. "Can you go get Mrs. Henderson?" Quinton ran. Catherine had never seen him move so fast. He was back within a half hour, Mrs. Henderson in tow, carrying her bag of supplies. The older woman took one look at Catherine and nodded approvingly. "You are doing well," she said. "This might take a while, though, especially for a first baby. Let us get you comfortable." The next hours passed in a blur of pain and effort. Mrs. Henderson stayed calm and encouraging, guiding Catherine through each contraction. Quinton held her hand, wiped her brow with cool cloths, and told her over and over how strong she was, how proud he was, how much he loved her. As midnight approached, the contractions intensified. Mrs. Henderson examined Catherine and announced that it was time to push. Catherine was exhausted, her body wrung out from hours of labor, but she found strength she did not know she had. With Quinton supporting her back and Mrs. Henderson coaching her, she pushed with everything she had. And then, in the early hours of morning, as the sky outside their window was just beginning to lighten with dawn, their baby was born. A lusty cry filled the small house, and Mrs. Henderson lifted the infant, still covered in blood and fluid but perfect, absolutely perfect. "A boy," she announced, smiling broadly. "A healthy baby boy." Catherine sobbed with relief and joy as Mrs. Henderson placed the baby on her chest. He was tiny and red-faced and screaming his displeasure at being thrust into the cold world, but to Catherine he was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. She looked up at Quinton and saw tears streaming down his face. "We have a son," she whispered. "We have a son," Quinton repeated. He reached out with one trembling finger to touch the baby's tiny hand, and the infant's fingers immediately curled around it. "Hello, little one. I am your father." They named him James Quinton Quinn, honoring both the man who had been and the man who was. Catherine felt it was right, a way of acknowledging her past while embracing her future. Quinton agreed without hesitation, understanding the importance of the gesture. Mrs. Henderson stayed for a few hours, making sure both Catherine and the baby were stable, then left them alone with their new son. In the quiet of the morning, with baby James sleeping between them in the bed, Catherine and Quinton simply stared at him, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they had created. "He is perfect," Quinton said softly. "He is ours," Catherine replied, and felt the truth of it settle deep in her bones. This child, this family, this life. All of it was real, all of it was hers. The next weeks were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Baby James demanded constant attention, feeding every few hours, crying when he was uncomfortable or needed changing. Catherine was sore and tired, her body still recovering from the ordeal of birth. But every time she looked at her son, every time Quinton came home and scooped the baby up with such tenderness, she felt her heart expand. Quinton proved to be a devoted father. He would wake with Catherine for the nighttime feedings, changing diapers and walking the baby back to sleep so Catherine could rest. On his days off from the ranch, he would take over baby care completely, insisting that Catherine take time to bathe or nap or simply sit outside and enjoy the sunshine. As summer progressed, baby James grew and changed. His eyes, which had been the murky blue of all newborns, darkened to brown like his father's. His personality began to emerge. He was a happy baby, quick to smile, and he seemed to love being outside, calming immediately when Catherine took him down to the river to watch the water flow. One evening in August, as they sat outside watching the sunset with James asleep in Catherine's arms, Quinton turned to her with a serious expression. "I have been thinking about something," he said. "What is that?" "The ranch foreman is retiring next year," Quinton said. "The owner asked if I would be interested in the position. It would mean more money, enough that we could think about expanding our house, maybe buying a few cattle of our own to start a small herd." Catherine looked at their little house, at the one room that now felt crowded with the three of them. "That would be wonderful," she said. "But are you ready for that kind of responsibility?" "I think so," Quinton said, "and I want to build something for our family. For James and for any other children we might have. I want them to have security, a legacy." "Other children," Catherine repeated, raising an eyebrow. "I just had this one a few months ago," Quinton laughed. "Not right away, but someday maybe, if you want." Catherine looked down at James, at his perfect sleeping face. "Someday," she agreed. "I would like that." True to Quinton's word, he was offered the foreman position when it came available the following spring. The increase in pay was substantial, and they began making plans immediately. Quinton would expand the house, adding 2 bedrooms and enlarging the main living space. They would buy a few cows and a bull, start building their own herd. It was ambitious, but for the first time in her life, Catherine felt like dreams were achievable rather than just wishful thinking. The construction began in summer, when the weather was good and Quinton could work long hours. He hired 2 ranch hands to help, and the house grew before Catherine's eyes. It was strange and exciting to watch their small one-room home transform into something larger, more permanent. By autumn, the expansion was complete. Catherine walked through the new space, marveling at the 2 bedrooms, one for them and one for James. A proper kitchen area with a real stove that Quinton had bought from a family leaving New Mexico. A larger living space where they could entertain, though they rarely had visitors. "What do you think?" Quinton asked, watching her anxiously. "It is perfect," Catherine said, and meant it. "You have given us a real home, Quinton, not just shelter but a home." That winter was mild, and their small herd of cattle survived well. By spring, they had 2 calves, and Quinton was already talking about expanding further. Catherine watched him with amusement and love. He had found his purpose, she realized. Building this life for their family was his calling, just as being a mother had become hers. James was walking now, toddling around the house and yard with the determined gait of a child learning his body. He was fearless, climbing on everything, exploring constantly. Quinton had to build a fence to keep him away from the river, which James found endlessly fascinating. On an evening in June, 2 years after their wedding, Catherine felt the familiar signs of pregnancy returning. The queasiness, the fatigue, the missed monthly courses. She waited to be certain before telling Quinton, but this time there was no fear mixed with the joy. Just happiness at the thought of giving James a sibling. Quinton's reaction was pure delight. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing, then set her down quickly. "Sorry, I should not have done that." "Are you all right?" "I am fine," Catherine said, laughing too. "It is early yet. The baby will not come until late winter." This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because Catherine knew what to expect. She stayed active as long as she could, chasing after the increasingly energetic James, helping Quinton with the lighter ranch work. By the time her belly grew too large to be practical, winter had set in, and there was less to do anyway. Their second child, a daughter they named Clara Ann, was born in February during a snowstorm. The labor was faster this time, only 6 hours from start to finish, and Mrs. Henderson declared it the easiest birth she had ever attended. Clara was different from James in every way. Where he had been loud and demanding, she was quiet and content. Where he had fought sleep, she dozed peacefully for hours. Catherine fell in love with her immediately, with her tiny rosebud mouth and the downy dark hair that covered her head. James, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister. He wanted to hold her constantly, to touch her tiny hands and feet. Quinton supervised these interactions carefully, teaching James to be gentle, and Catherine felt her heart swell watching her little family. Life settled into a new rhythm with 2 children. The days were full and exhausting, but Catherine had never been happier. She would think sometimes about that desperate widow in a tent by the river, about how hopeless and alone she had felt. It seemed like a lifetime ago, like a different person entirely. The ranch prospered under Quinton's management. Their small herd grew to 20 head, then 30. Quinton hired a couple of hands to help manage them, young men who reminded Catherine of Quinton when he had first arrived, looking for work and a place to belong. Quinton was a good boss, fair but firm, and the men respected him. As James and Clara grew, Catherine began to feel restless. She loved being a mother, but she missed having work of her own. She mentioned this to Quinton one evening, worried he would be offended, but he understood immediately. "What would you want to do?" he asked. Catherine had been thinking about this. "I would like to start a business. Washing clothes again, but properly this time. We could build a dedicated wash house, maybe hire a girl or 2 to help. There is always demand for it." "That is a wonderful idea," Quinton said. "Let us do it." They built the wash house that spring, a sturdy structure near the river with multiple wash stations and drying racks. Catherine put word out in Santa Rosa that she was resuming her business, and the customers came flooding back. She hired 2 young women from town who needed work, and together they built a thriving enterprise. Having her own income again made Catherine feel more complete. She loved her children and her husband, but she needed this too. The satisfaction of work well done, of building something with her own hands. Quinton never made her feel guilty for it, never suggested she should stay home instead. He supported her fully, even taking over child care duties when Catherine needed to focus on the business. The years passed in a blur of work and family and quiet joy. James grew into a serious boy who loved books and learning. Clara was adventurous and bold, always getting into mischief. They were as different as night and day, but they adored each other. When James was 6 and Clara was 4, Catherine found herself pregnant again. This time it was completely unexpected, and she felt a moment of panic. 3 children. Could they manage 3 children? But Quinton was thrilled, and James and Clara were excited at the prospect of another sibling. So Catherine let herself be excited too. Their 3rd child, another boy they named Thomas after Quinton's father, was born in early autumn. He was the perfect blend of his siblings, neither too quiet nor too loud, content but not passive. Catherine nursed him in the rocking chair Quinton had built, watching through the window as James and Clara played in the yard, and felt a sense of completeness she had never imagined possible. As winter set in, Catherine found herself thinking about the passage of time. She was 31 now, Quinton 34. They had been married 7 years, though it felt both longer and shorter than that. 7 years of building a life together, of growing their family, of creating something lasting and real. One evening, with all 3 children finally asleep, Catherine and Quinton sat together by the fire as they had done countless times before. But this time, Catherine felt the need to speak, to articulate something that had been forming in her mind for months. "You ever think about that first day?" she asked. "When you stopped at my tent," Quinton smiled, that warm smile that still made her heart skip. "All the time." "What made you stop?" Catherine asked. "Really?" Quinton was quiet for a moment, staring into the flames. "Honestly, I do not know. Something just told me I needed to, like fate was pushing me toward you." "Do you believe in fate?" Catherine asked. "I did not used to," Quinton said. "But meeting you, building our life together, all of it feels like it was meant to be, so yes, I suppose I do now." Catherine reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. "I loved James," she said quietly. "I need you to know that." "I do know that," Quinton said gently. "But what I feel for you is different," Catherine continued. "Bigger, maybe, or just different because I am different. I was so young when I married James. I did not really know myself yet. With you, I know exactly who I am and what I want is this. You, our children, the life we have built, I want it all." Quinton brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles. "You have given me everything I never knew I needed. Before you, I was just wandering, looking for something but not knowing what. You gave me a home, Catherine. Not just a house, but a home. You gave me purpose and love and family. You gave me a reason to be the best man I can be." They sat there in the firelight, holding hands, and Catherine felt the weight of years and choices and love settling around them like a blanket. This was her life. Not the one she had planned, not the one she had expected, but the one she had nonetheless. And it was good. The children grew and changed with the seasons. James started school in Santa Rosa, riding into town each morning with Quinton, who would drop him off on his way to the ranch. He proved to be a gifted student, taking after Catherine's family in that regard. Clara, when her time came, was less interested in books but loved animals, especially the horses. She would follow Quinton around the ranch on his days off, asking endless questions about everything. Thomas, as he grew from baby to toddler, showed signs of being a natural peacemaker. When James and Clara fought, which they did with increasing frequency as they got older, Thomas would toddle between them and pat their legs until they stopped. It was adorable and effective in equal measure. Catherine's business continued to thrive. She had 4 women working for her now, and they handled all the washing for not just Santa Rosa but several surrounding ranches as well. The income was substantial, enough that when combined with Quinton's foreman's salary, they were more financially secure than Catherine had ever dreamed possible. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Quinton surprised her with a gift. A piece of land, 30 acres adjoining their current property, purchased from a rancher who was selling off parts of his holdings. "I thought we could expand," Quinton said, watching her face carefully. "Build up the herd more, maybe plant some crops, leave something substantial for the children." Catherine looked at the deed, at their names written together in official script. Quinton and Catherine Quinn. A family, a partnership, a legacy. "It is perfect," she said. "You are perfect." "I am far from perfect," Quinton said, but he was smiling. "I am just a man who loves you." "That is all I need," Catherine replied. They expanded the ranch gradually over the next few years. The herd grew to over 100 head. They planted wheat and corn in the new fields. Quinton hired more hands, building bunkhouses for them to live in. What had started as a small house by the river had grown into a proper ranch operation. The children helped with the work as they got older. James, despite his love of books, proved to be a capable hand with the cattle. Clara was a natural horsewoman, fearless and skilled beyond her years. Thomas, when he was old enough, showed an aptitude for business, keeping track of expenses and income with a precision that impressed even Catherine. Catherine often found herself standing at her window, looking out at the bustling activity of the ranch, and marveling at how far they had come. From a desperate widow in a tent to the matriarch of a thriving family enterprise. It seemed impossible, and yet here it was. When James was 16, he announced that he wanted to go to college. Catherine's heart soared and broke at the same time. She was so proud of his ambition, but the thought of him leaving filled her with sadness. Quinton, seeing her struggle, took her hand and reminded her that this was what they had worked for, to give their children opportunities, to let them reach for their dreams. They sent James to a college in Albuquerque, and Catherine cried for 3 days after he left. But his letters came regularly, full of excitement about his studies and his plans. He wanted to become a lawyer, to help people who could not help themselves. Catherine thought about her own desperate situation years ago, about how vulnerable she had been, and felt pride that her son wanted to protect others from that kind of helplessness. Clara had no interest in leaving. She announced at 15 that she was going to stay on the ranch forever, and Catherine believed her. She watched her daughter work with the horses, breaking and training them with skill that rivaled any of the hired hands, and knew Clara had found her calling. Thomas, as he entered his teenage years, expressed interest in expanding the washing business into a full-service laundry with modern equipment and facilities. Catherine loved the idea and began working with him on plans. Mother and son spent hours together, sketching designs and calculating costs, and Catherine was grateful for the bond they were forming. On a warm evening in June, with Catherine now 42 and Quinton 45, they sat on the porch they had added to the house years ago and watched the sunset. The ranch was quiet, the day's work done, the children off doing their own things. It was just the two of them, as it had been so many times over the years. "You have any regrets?" Catherine asked suddenly. Quinton looked at her, surprised. "Regrets?" "About stopping that day by the river," Catherine clarified. "About building me a house, about staying, about all of this. Do you ever wish you had just kept riding?" Quinton took her hand, and Catherine noticed the way age had marked both of them. His hands were more weathered now, lined and calloused from years of work. Her own hands were the same, no longer the soft hands of the St. Louis girl she had been, but the capable hands of a woman who had built a life. "Not a single regret," Quinton said firmly. "That was the best decision I ever made. Everything good in my life came from stopping that day. You, our children, this ranch, all of it. I would make the same choice 1,000 times over." "I love you," Catherine said, the words as true now as the first time she had said them. "I love you too," Quinton replied. "Always have, always will." As the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, Catherine leaned her head on Quinton's shoulder and thought about the journey that had brought them here. The grief and loss, the hope and love, the years of work and dedication. It had not always been easy, but it had been worth it. Every moment, every struggle, every joy, all of it had been worth it. James came home from college that summer with a young woman he wanted them to meet. Sarah was smart and kind, and Catherine liked her immediately. When James announced their engagement the following spring, Catherine felt the bittersweet pang of watching her child become an adult. He was 21 now, fully grown, ready to start his own family. The wedding was held at the ranch, with half of Santa Rosa in attendance. Catherine watched her son marry his sweetheart and remembered her own wedding so many years ago, the small gathering in the church, the hope and nervousness she had felt. James looked happy, radiantly happy, and that was all that mattered. Clara showed no signs of settling down, though she had suitors aplenty. She was too busy with the horses, she said. Maybe someday, but not now. Catherine understood. Some people knew from childhood what they wanted, and for Clara, it was the ranch and the animals. Romance could wait. Thomas, at 17, was already running much of the business side of their operations. He had a head for numbers and logistics that impressed everyone who worked with him. Catherine had no doubt he would expand their enterprises far beyond what she and Quinton had built. As Catherine approached her 50th birthday, she found herself thinking more and more about legacy. Not just the financial legacy of the ranch and businesses, but the emotional legacy. What would her children and grandchildren remember about her? What values had she passed on? She thought about the widow in the tent, about how easy it would have been to give up, to let despair win. But she had not given up. She had accepted help when it was offered, taken a chance on love, worked hard to build something lasting. That was what she wanted her legacy to be. Resilience, courage, love, and the willingness to embrace second chances. Quinton's hair had gone silver, and Catherine's was streaked with gray. Their bodies ached more than they used to, and they moved more slowly. But the love between them had not dimmed. If anything, it had grown stronger, deepened by years of partnership and shared experience. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a celebration at the ranch. The entire town seemed to be there, along with ranch hands past and present, business associates, friends they had made over the years. Catherine looked around at the gathering and felt overwhelmed by gratitude. James gave a speech, talking about how his parents had shown him what real love looked like. Clara presented them with a pair of horses she had trained specifically for them, gentler mounts suitable for their aging bodies. Thomas unveiled plans for a new wing on the house, his anniversary gift, to be built over the next year. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Catherine and Quinton found themselves alone on the porch again, their favorite spot. The moon was full, casting silver light across the ranch. 25 years, Catherine said wonderingly, a quarter of a century. Best 25 years of my life, Quinton said. Mine too, Catherine agreed. She thought about everything they had experienced together. 3 children raised, a ranch built from nothing, businesses established, a community joined. Births and deaths, joys and sorrows, ordinary days and extraordinary moments, all of it woven together into the fabric of their lives. You remember what you said to me that first day? Catherine asked. When you offered to build me a house. I said it was the right thing to do, Quinton recalled. It was so much more than that, Catherine said. You saved my life that day, not just by building me shelter, but by giving me hope, by seeing me as a person worth helping, worth loving. You changed everything. You changed me too, Quinton said softly. I was lost before I found you, just drifting through life without purpose. You gave me a reason to be better, to build something meaningful." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands as they had done thousands of times before. Catherine thought about the girl she had been when she married James, young and naive and full of romantic notions. She thought about the desperate widow in the tent, broken and alone. And she thought about the woman she was now, strong and capable and surrounded by love. All those versions of herself were still there, layered one upon another like rings in a tree trunk. Each experience, each loss, each joy had shaped her into who she was. And who she was, she realized, was happy. Deeply, truly happy. Over the next few years, more grandchildren arrived. James and Sarah had 3 children in quick succession, 2 boys and a girl. Clara finally married a neighboring rancher's son and had twins, both girls, who inherited their mother's fearless nature. Thomas married the daughter of one of Catherine's business partners, and they had a son, quiet and thoughtful like his father. Catherine reveled in being a grandmother. She had more patience now than she had as a young mother, more wisdom to share. She would gather the grandchildren on the porch and tell them stories about the old days, about the tent by the river and the cowboy who stopped to help. The children would listen wide-eyed, as if she were telling fairy tales instead of her own history. Quinton was equally devoted to the grandchildren, teaching them to ride, to rope, to work with their hands. Catherine would watch him with the little ones and remember him with their own children, and her heart would swell with love. He had been a wonderful father, and he was an even better grandfather. On a spring morning when Catherine was 58 and Quinton 61, they took a ride together down to the river. It had become a tradition of sorts, going back to where it all began. The tent was long gone, of course, but the spot was still recognizable. The same cottonwood trees, older and larger now. The same rush of water over stones. They dismounted and stood looking at the river. Catherine tried to imagine herself back there, that desperate widow washing clothes for pennies. It felt like a dream now, distant and unreal. "Thank you," she said suddenly. "For what?" Quinton asked. "For stopping," Catherine said simply. "For seeing me. For building me a home, for all of it." Quinton pulled her close, and she rested her head against his chest, hearing his heartbeat steady and strong. "Thank you for letting me stay," he said. "For taking a chance on a wandering cowboy. For building a life with me." They stood there by the river, the water flowing past as it had for centuries and would for centuries more. Catherine thought about the passage of time, about how quickly life moved. It seemed like just yesterday that Quinton had ridden into her life. And yet here they were, grown old together, surrounded by the family and life they had built. As they rode back to the ranch, Catherine looked at everything with fresh eyes. The house that had started as a simple one-room structure and grown into a sprawling home. The barn and outbuildings, the corrals full of horses, the fields planted with crops, the cattle grazing in distant pastures. The wash house where her business still thrived under Thomas's management. The bunkhouses where their hired hands lived. All of this had started with one cowboy's decision to stop and help a widow in need. One act of kindness had rippled outward, creating all of this. It was remarkable when she thought about it. The power of compassion, the impact one person could have on another's life. That evening, surrounded by their children and grandchildren for Sunday dinner, a tradition Catherine had insisted on years ago, she looked around the table and felt complete. This was what she had built. Not just wealth or property, but family. Connection. Love that would ripple forward into the future, long after she and Quinton were gone. James was discussing a case he was working on, defending a widow whose property was being unfairly seized. Catherine smiled at the echo of her own story. Clara was planning a horse-buying trip to Texas. Thomas was excited about new equipment he wanted to purchase for the laundry. The grandchildren were chattering about their own interests and activities. And through it all, Quinton sat at the head of the table, the patriarch of this family he and Catherine had created. His hair was silver now, his face lined, but his eyes were still that same warm brown, still full of love when they looked at her. As the years continued to pass, Catherine and Quinton gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch and businesses. Their children were more than capable of managing everything, and Catherine found she enjoyed having more leisure time. She took up painting, something she had always wanted to try. Quinton spent hours in his workshop, creating beautiful wooden furniture for their grandchildren. They traveled a bit, visiting places they had always wanted to see. Denver and its modern buildings. San Francisco and the ocean, which Catherine had never seen before. Even a trip back to St. Louis, where Catherine nervously reunited with her mother. Her father had passed away years ago, and the reconciliation with her mother was bittersweet but healing. Through it all, they returned always to the ranch, to the home by the river. That was where they belonged, where their roots ran deep. On a quiet evening in late autumn, when Catherine was 67 and Quinton 70, they sat on their porch wrapped in blankets against the cooling air. The ranch was peaceful, the workday done. Smoke rose from chimneys across the property. Laughter drifted from one of the houses where their grandchildren were playing. "What are you thinking about?" Quinton asked, noticing Catherine's contemplative expression. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Catherine said. "How blessed. I had a second chance at life and love, and I took it. Not everyone gets that." "I am the lucky one," Quinton insisted. "A wandering cowboy who found everything he never knew he needed." "We are both lucky," Catherine decided. She reached for his hand, and their fingers intertwined automatically, the gesture worn smooth by decades of repetition. "We found each other. We built something beautiful together. We have children and grandchildren who love us. We have been given so much." As the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Catherine thought about the passage of time and the nature of happiness. It was not, she had learned, about avoiding hardship or never experiencing loss. Happiness was about resilience, about taking what life gave you and making the best of it, about accepting help when you needed it and offering help when you could. Most of all, happiness was about love. The love she had shared with James, brief but real. The love she shared with Quinton, deep and lasting. The love they had created in their children and watched bloom in their grandchildren. Love that would continue long after they were gone, rippling forward into the future. That night, lying in bed with Quinton's arms around her, Catherine felt at peace. Whatever came next, whatever the future held, she had lived a good life. She had loved and been loved. She had built something lasting. She had made a difference. More years passed, seasons cycling through their eternal rhythm. Catherine and Quinton grew older still, their bodies slowing but their minds sharp. They celebrated 50 years of marriage with another grand party. 3 generations gathered to honor them. Their great-grandchildren were arriving now. Babies and toddlers who would never know the hardship their great-grandmother had endured, who would grow up secure in the knowledge that they were loved and protected. Catherine held each new baby, marveling at the continuation of life, at how her decision to accept help from a passing cowboy had led to all these souls existing in the world. As Catherine approached her 75th birthday, she began to feel the weight of her years more heavily. Her joints ached, her vision was not as sharp as it once was, and she tired easily. But she did not complain. She had lived a long life, a full life, and she was grateful for every moment. Quinton, at 78, was also slowing down. But he was still there, still her partner, still the man who had built her a house and given her a reason to hope. They moved through their days together with the ease of people who knew each other completely, who could communicate with a glance or a touch. On a warm summer evening, Catherine and Quinton made one final trip down to the river. It took longer than it used to, their horses walking slowly, but they made it. They stood together at the water's edge, at the spot where Catherine's tent had once stood, and looked at everything they had built. "No regrets?" Catherine asked, as she had asked so many times over the years. "Not a single one," Quinton replied, as he always did. "You?" "Only that I cannot live it all over again," Catherine said. She meant it. Given the choice, she would choose this life every time. They stood there as the sun set, hand in hand, and Catherine felt the circle closing. From that desperate morning when Quinton had first ridden into her life to this peaceful evening in their twilight years, it had been an incredible journey. Whatever came next, whatever lay beyond this life, Catherine knew she would face it without fear. She had loved deeply and been deeply loved. She had built a family, a legacy, a life worth living. She had taken the kindness a stranger had offered and multiplied it 1,000-fold. As they rode slowly back to the ranch, to the home Quinton had built all those years ago, Catherine looked at the man beside her and smiled. He had been a passing cowboy once, but he had stayed. He had built her a house and so much more. He had built her a life, a family, a future. And that, Catherine thought, was the greatest gift anyone had ever given her. The gift of hope, of second chances, of love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. The gift of home.